The gun was already on the table when Divine Caraway walked into the back room of the Hanwoo Grill, and the first thing she noticed wasn't the weapon. It was the steam still rising off the bowl of soup she'd carried in, the same soup she'd been ladling out to strangers for 11 years, and how absurd it looked sitting there between two men in $3,000 suits who were deciding whether she would live to see Thursday. "You know who I am," the older one said. His name was Baek Sun-ho, and his voice was soft the way a closing door is soft. "And you know who he is, so you understand why this is a problem." She did not look at the man they were talking about. She'd learned, in the 4 months since the night she'd handed a freezing stranger a paper container of oxtail stew outside her grandmother's shuttered diner, exactly how dangerous it was to look at Jin-woo when other people were watching. So she stared at the soup instead, watched the oil pool gold on its surface. And she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, "I have been afraid my whole life of small things. Late rent, a sister's silence, a man's raised voice. And here I am, finally afraid of something that deserves it, and my hands aren't even shaking." Divine. That was Jin-woo, Park Jin-woo, the man who, she'd discovered too late, owned 40% of the commercial real estate between the river and the rail yard, 3 banks' worth of laundered patients, and a reputation that made grown men go quiet when his car pulled up. The man she had fed for free, 3 nights running, because he'd looked hungry and lost and like someone's son. "Don't say anything. Whatever happens next, you say nothing." But Baek Sun-ho smiled and slid a single photograph across the lacquered table, and Divine looked down and felt the floor tilt. It was a picture of her sister, Talisa, standing outside her apartment in Oakwood with her keys in her hand, unaware, ordinary, alive, with a red circle drawn around her head in grease pencil like a target. "The woman feeds my enemy," Sun-ho said pleasantly. "So the woman has a debt. Debts are paid in kind. You took something that was mine to take. So I take something that is yours to lose. It's very simple. It's almost beautiful, how simple." And Divine Caraway, who had spent 34 years being the one who absorbed, who apologized, who made herself smaller so other people could feel large, stood up so fast the chair screamed against the floor, and put her own body between that photograph and the door, and heard herself say in a voice she didn't recognize, "You touch my sister, and I will burn every building you own to the ground, and I will start with this one." Nobody laughed. That was the terrifying part. In a room full of men who killed people, nobody laughed. But to understand how Divine ended up here, soup in her hands, a target on her sister, and a Korean crime boss across the table she had accidentally fallen in love with, we need to go back. Back to a cold November night, a closed diner, and a single act of kindness that should have meant nothing at all. If you've ever been the person who gives and gives until there's nothing left, who feeds everyone else at the table and eats whatever's cold afterward, this story is for you. If you've ever wondered whether being good in a hard world makes you strong or just makes you a target, stay with me, because Divine asked herself that exact question, and the answer is not what you think. This is a story about a woman who gave a hungry stranger a meal and accidentally pulled the most dangerous man in the city into her life. But it's really a story about the difference between being kind because you're afraid and being kind because you're free. Those look the same from the outside. They are nothing alike on the inside. Before we go further, if stories about ordinary women who discover they are not ordinary at all are why you're here, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me, have you ever been kind to someone and had it change your entire life? I read every single one. Now, back to the diner and the night everything started. The Caraway Diner on Lot Street had been closed for 2 years by the time Divine started using its kitchen again, and technically she wasn't supposed to be there at all. Her grandmother, Miss Eddie Caraway, had run that diner for 31 years, opened it in 1989 with money she'd saved cleaning houses, named it Eddie's in cursive neon that buzzed like a trapped bee, and fed half the neighborhood breakfast on credit they never paid back and she never chased. When Miss Eddie died, she left the building to Divine and a mountain of back taxes to go with it. Divine couldn't afford to reopen. She couldn't afford to sell either, not with the lien on it. So the diner just sat there on Lot Street, dark, while she paid what she could each month to keep the city from taking it. But Divine had inherited more than the building. She'd inherited the thing Miss Eddie had, where you could not, physically could not, watch a person be hungry and do nothing. So 3 nights a week after her shift, Divine let herself into the cold, dead diner with her grandmother's key, fired up 1 burner of the old 8-burner range, and cooked oxtail stew, red beans, whatever she could buy with the $40 she set aside from each paycheck. Then she carried it out the back door in paper containers and gave it to the people who slept under the rail bridge 2 blocks down. That was her secret, her one extravagance. Everything else in her life she gave away on demand. Take her sister, Talisa. 3 years younger, twice as loud, and absolutely certain that the universe owed her something it kept forgetting to deliver. Talisa had a gift for emergencies, a car that died the week rent was due, a phone that broke before a job interview, a situation with a man that always, somehow, cost money to resolve. And Divine paid. Every time. She'd co-signed Talisa's apartment lease in Oakwood. She'd covered her sister's phone bill for so long that the account was in Divine's name, and Talisa had stopped pretending it would ever change. "You're the strong one," Talisa would say, and the words landed like a compliment and a sentence at the same time. "You don't need it the way I do." Divine was 34. She worked days as a billing coordinator at Meridian Medical Group, a job she was good at and invisible in, processing the financial wreckage of other people's catastrophes for $19 an hour. She'd been there 9 years. She'd trained 4 people who'd been promoted over her. Her supervisor, a man named Kessler who wore the same anxious cologne every day, had told her once, meaning it as praise, "Divine, you're the glue. I don't even think about billing because of you." Glue. She'd thought about that word for weeks. The thing nobody notices until it's gone. The thing that holds everything together and gets none of the credit and dries up alone in a drawer. She lived in a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a walk-up on Carthage Avenue, and she'd lived there 8 years, and in 8 years she had not bought herself a single thing she didn't strictly need. Her couch was her grandmother's. Her television had a crack in the corner she'd learned to read around. She had $412 in savings, a number she knew to the dollar because it had been her entire buffer against disaster for as long as she could remember, and it never grew, because every time it crept toward 500, Talisa would call, or the diner taxes would come due, or someone at church would need just a little help, sister, just till Friday. The lie Divine believed, and she believed it the way you believe the ground will hold, without ever once examining it, was this, that love was the same as usefulness, that if she stopped being needed, she would stop being loved, that her worth was a thing she paid out in installments, and the day she stopped paying, the people in her life would simply close the account and walk away. She'd learned it young. Their mother had been a woman of vast warmth and vaster instability, and little Divine had figured out by age 7 that the way to keep the warmth coming was to be no trouble at all, to anticipate, to absorb, to be the easy one, the good one, the one who never needed anything, so that the love, rationed, conditional, real but thin, would not run dry. She carried it into adulthood like a spine. She didn't even feel it as a burden. It just felt like who she was. There was a man once, Marcus, 3 years. He'd been kind at first, and then comfortable, and then slowly, like water finding the lowest point, he'd settled into letting Divine carry things. The rent when he was between situations. The emotional weather of his bad days. The apologies, even. She'd apologized to him after he snapped, because keeping the peace was her job, her whole inheritance of a job. When he left for a woman who, he said, doesn't make me feel guilty all the time. Divine had spent a year wondering what she'd done to make him feel guilty, before she understood. She'd done nothing. His guilt was his. She'd just been close enough to absorb it, the way she absorbed everything. So that was Divine Caraway. On the November night this story really begins. 34 years old, glue, $412 to her name, a sister who loved her like a utility, and a job that ran on her like one, a dead grandmother's diner she couldn't keep and couldn't let go, and a secret kitchen where 3 nights a week she got to feel for 1 hour like the person she might have been if she'd ever once been allowed to choose. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to choose. And the choice would look, at first, like nothing at all. Just a paper container of oxtail stew, handed to a stranger in the cold. That's the thing about the moment your life changes. It almost never announces itself. It just gets in line behind 100 ordinary nights and waits its turn. The night it came for Divine, it was raining, and she almost didn't see him at all. He was sitting on the loading step behind the old diner, soaked through, and he didn't look up when the back door opened. That was the first strange thing. Everyone looked up. The people Divine fed under the rail bridge had a radar for the door, the smell, the footstep. Hunger sharpens you like that. But this man sat with his forearms on his knees and his head down, and the rain running off the ends of his black hair, and he didn't move, like a man who had stopped expecting anything from the sound of a door. He wore a coat that had once been very good. Wool, dark, the kind with horn buttons, except half the buttons were gone and one sleeve was torn at the shoulder seam, and there was a dark stiffness down the left side of it that Divine, who had processed 9 years of medical billing, recognized after 1 second too long as dried blood. "Hey," she said, soft, the voice you use on a hurt animal. "You hungry?" He looked up then. And Divine, who prided herself on reading people, who could tell from a patient's first sentence on the phone whether they were going to cry or shout, found that she could read absolutely nothing on this man's face. He was maybe 40, sharp-boned, exhausted, with eyes so still they were almost frightening, like deep water that has never once been disturbed. There was a bruise blooming along his jaw. He looked at her and at the paper container in her hands, and something moved behind the stillness. Not hope exactly, calculation. As if even now, even like this, he was running the math on what her kindness was going to cost him. "Why?" he said. His English was lightly accented, precise, each word set down carefully like he was placing stones across a river. "Why what?" "Why would you give me food?" Divine had been asked many things by hungry people. Thank you, mostly, sometimes nothing. Once, by a man who'd been a math teacher before the bottom fell out, a long, beautiful explanation of prime numbers she still thought about. But no one had ever asked her why, like the answer mattered, like it was a door he needed to walk through carefully. "Because you're sitting in the rain and you look like you haven't eaten," she said. "That's the whole reason. There isn't another one." She held the container out. He looked at it. He looked at her. And then, slowly, like a man unlearning something, he took it. His hands were shaking, not from cold, she'd realize later, but from blood loss. And when he opened the lid and the steam hit his face, he closed his eyes, just for a second. And Divine saw the exhaustion go all the way down to the bottom of him. "It's oxtail," she said, because she didn't know what to do with the silence. "My grandmother's recipe. There's more if you—" "Sit," he said. She didn't. She wasn't a fool. She stayed standing by the door with her keys threaded through her fingers the way every woman is taught. But she stayed, and she watched him eat, slowly at first, and then not slowly at all. And somewhere in the middle of it, he said, without looking up, "You're going to want to call someone about my arm. But you can't. There's no—" He stopped, recalibrated. "It's not the kind of thing you call someone about. That's blood. Yes. That's a lot of blood. It looks worse than it is." He set the empty container down with a strange, formal care. "Thank you. This was—" And again that searching, that careful placing of stones. "This was a kind thing. I'm not going to forget it. I want you to understand that I am not a man who forgets things." It should have sounded like a threat. Some part of her knew it was, a little. But mostly it sounded like the loneliest sentence she'd ever heard. And against every instinct she'd spent 34 years building, Divine went back inside and came out with the first aid kit from under the register, and a clean dish towel, and the rest of the pot. His name, he told her, was Jin-woo. Just that. He didn't ask for hers, which she noticed, and which she'd understand much later was a courtesy. He was protecting her, even then, from being someone he knew. She cleaned the wound on his arm by the light of her phone. It was not a wound you got from falling. She knew that and didn't say it. He watched her work with that same still water in his eyes, and at one point he said quietly, "You should be more afraid of me." And she said equally quietly, "I've spent my whole life being afraid of people. You're not the scariest thing I've handled this week." And for the first time, something cracked in his stillness, and he almost smiled. He came back the next night. And the night after that, 3 nights, like the start of a folktale. Each time a little less gray, a little steadier. Each time he asked her a question she didn't expect, not where she was from or what she did, but things like, what was your grandmother like? And do you ever cook for yourself? And once, devastatingly, who taught you that you have to earn the right to be fed? She didn't have an answer for that one. It sat in her chest for days. On the 3rd night, a black car idled at the end of Lot Street the whole hour he was there. Divine saw it. She wasn't stupid. And when Jin-woo stood to leave, he stopped and looked at the dark diner, the buzzing dead neon, the woman who'd fed him for nothing 3 nights running, and he said something that didn't make sense to her until much later. "This place, Eddie's, your grandmother's." He wasn't asking. "There's a lien on it. City's holding it for back taxes, $18,400. The building's worth 9 times that, and they'll let it rot rather than help you keep it." He looked at her with those still eyes. "I know things, Divine Caraway. It's the one thing I'm good at. And I know that you've been keeping a dead woman's kitchen alive to feed strangers, while the people you love feed on you. I've been watching that happen to you for 3 nights, and it's making me—" He searched for the word, and didn't find a polite one and gave up. "It's making me angry." She hadn't told him her last name. She hadn't told him about the lien, or the $18,400, or any of it. "How do you know my name?" she whispered. The black car's door opened at the end of the street. A man in a dark coat stepped out and stood waiting, hands folded, the way men wait when they are not really asking. "Because finding things out is what I do," Jin-woo said. "And because 3 days ago, I needed to know who'd saved my life before I let anyone else find out first." He started toward the car, stopped, turned back. "Don't come here tomorrow. Don't cook tomorrow. Stay home, lock your door, and tomorrow you'll understand why." "Jin-woo, who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment, in the rain, under the dead neon, and the answer he gave was the truest and most useless thing anyone had ever told her. "I'm the reason your kindness was dangerous," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how good you were until it was already too late to protect you from knowing me." Then he got in the car, and it pulled away, and Divine stood alone in the rain holding an empty pot, with a stranger's full name for herself echoing in her ears, and absolutely no idea that by this time tomorrow, 3 different men would know exactly who she was, where she lived, and what, to the dollar, her kindness was about to cost her. She found out who he was from the news, before she found out from him. She'd done what he said. She stayed home. And the next evening, scrolling her phone on her grandmother's couch with the cracked TV murmuring, she saw the photograph, his photograph, that exact still face, under a headline about a federal investigation into the Sunho organization, and the words swam in front of her. Park Jin-woo, named in court documents as a senior figure in one of the city's most entrenched criminal enterprises. Real estate, money laundering, the kind of organization that owns the building your favorite restaurant is in, and you never know it. She set the phone down very carefully, like it might go off. The man she'd cleaned a knife wound on with a register dish towel was not someone's lost son. He was Park Jin-woo. And the more she read over the next 2 hours, sitting frozen, the stew she'd made for herself going cold, the irony of that not lost on her, the worse it got, and the more it didn't add up, because the story the news told and the man she'd met did not match. The news said senior figure, enforcer, the right hand of Baek Sun-ho. The man she'd met had asked her who taught her she had to earn the right to be fed. The news said dangerous. The man she'd met had spent his last ounce of strength warning her to stay away from him. There was a gap there, a space between the headline and the human, and Divine, who'd spent her whole life reading the gap between what people said and what they needed, could not stop staring into it. He came to her door the next night, not the diner, her actual door on the 3rd floor of the walk-up on Carthage Avenue, which meant he'd known where she lived the entire time, and had simply, until now, chosen not to use it. She opened it on the chain. "You're a criminal." "Yes." "You hurt people." "I have." No hedging, no softening. The stillness again, but underneath it, something she hadn't seen before, a kind of grief worn so long it had become posture. "I'm not going to lie to you, Divine. You fed me when you thought I was nobody. The least I owe you is the truth, even the parts that make you hate me, especially those." She didn't take the chain off, but she didn't close the door either, and standing there in the hallway, in a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months, Park Jin-woo told her the truth, and the truth was so much worse than the headline. He hadn't chosen this life. He'd been given to it, sold, almost at 16, after his father died owing Baek Sun-ho a debt that a 16-year-old's labor was meant to pay off. 24 years he'd worked it off, and the debt never shrank, because that was the design. The debt was never meant to shrink. He was good at finding things out, so they made him the man who found things out, and then the man who acted on what he found. And somewhere in 24 years, the boy who'd wanted to be an architect had become the still-eyed man the city was afraid of. The wound on his arm? He'd been cut by Sun-ho's people, not enemies, his own organization. Because Jin-woo had started doing the unforgivable thing, the thing that gets a man killed in that world. He'd started saying no. "There's a building," he said, "on Lot Street. Sun-ho wants the whole block. He's been buying it for years through shells, squeezing out the owners, and there are 6 properties left, and one of them—" He looked at her through the gap in the door. "One of them is a dead woman's diner with a tax lien on it, owned by a billing clerk who can't afford to keep it. The plan was simple. Let the city take it for the back taxes. Buy it from the city for nothing. I was supposed to handle the acquisition." That was the word in the file. Acquisition. 3 weeks ago, I read your grandmother's name in a folder on my desk, and a list of how to make your life hard enough that you'd let it go. Divine's hand went cold on the chain. "I came to look at the building," he said. "That's all." "I came to look at a building I was supposed to take from a stranger, and instead a knife found me first. That's a different story, an old one, my own people deciding I'd become a problem. And I crawled to the only dark doorway on the street, and the stranger I was sent to ruin came out into the rain and gave me her grandmother's soup and asked for nothing." His voice didn't break. It was steadier than anything she'd ever heard, and that steadiness was the most frightening thing of all. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, Divine? You didn't just feed a hungry man. You fed the man who was sent to take the last thing your grandmother left you, and in doing it, you made it impossible for me to do my job because I cannot." The stones, placed one at a time across the river. "I cannot take a kitchen from a woman who would feed her enemy in the rain. I told Sun-ho the diner was a dead end. I lied to the most dangerous man I know, to protect a stranger, and tonight I found out he doesn't believe me." "What does that mean?" she whispered. "He doesn't believe you." "It means he's going to check. It means men are going to start looking at you, at your sister, your job, your accounts, your whole life, to find out why I'd lie about a tax lien on a diner." He held her eyes. "I came here to tell you the truth, and to tell you to run. Take your sister. Disappear for a while. Because the kindest thing you ever did just put you in the worst place a person can be." And Divine Caraway, standing on her side of a chained door, looked at the man the whole city feared, the man who'd been sent to ruin her and couldn't, the man who'd lied to a killer rather than take her grandmother's stove, and she felt the old lie she'd lived her whole life by start to crack down the middle, because here, finally, was someone who had received her kindness and not turned it into a leash. who had taken what she offered and felt, of all things, obligated to protect her. Nobody had ever done that, not once, not in 34 years. She took the chain off the door. "I'm not running," she said. "Come in. You're going to tell me everything, and then you're going to help me figure out how a billing clerk and a man who owns half this city stop another man from owning the rest of it, because I have spent my entire life letting people take Jin-woo, and I think I'm done." He stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd given up on ever hearing. "You should be running," he said quietly. "Yeah," said Divine. "People keep telling me what I should do. Come inside." Jin-woo did not offer to save her. That was the first thing, and it was the thing that mattered most, and Divine would think about it for the rest of her life. A different kind of man, a fairy tale kind of man, would have said, "I'll handle it. I'll protect you. Stay behind me." Jin-woo sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, with a cup of tea he held but didn't drink, and laid out the truth like a surgeon laying out instruments, cold, exact, sparing her nothing. "I can't rescue you," he said. "Hear me clearly, because everything depends on you understanding this. If I make you a thing I protect, then you become a weakness, and weaknesses get used. Sunho already drew a circle around your sister in a file. The moment he believes you're mine to protect, your sister stops being a person and becomes a lever. The way you survive this is not by being protected. It's by becoming someone it costs too much to touch." "And how does a billing clerk become that?" Divine said. "By learning what I know." He set the tea down. "I have spent 24 years learning how this organization moves money, who it pays, which judges take calls, which buildings hide what. I am the most dangerous thing Baek Sunho owns, and the reason is not that I hurt people. It's that I keep records. I have kept records for 24 years, Divine, because I always knew that one day the only thing standing between me and a hole in the ground would be how much I could prove. I have a server, I have account numbers, shell company filings, the paper trail on every property on that block, including how he's planning to take the other 5. I have enough to end him." "Then use it." "I can't." For the first time, something like shame crossed his face. "If I walk into a federal building with that file, I am a confessed criminal turning state's evidence, and I will spend the rest of my life in a box, assuming I live to reach the courthouse, which I won't. The information is only a weapon in the right hands, not mine. Mine are dirty and everyone knows it." He looked at her. "But yours aren't." The kitchen was very quiet. The cracked TV murmured in the other room. "I'm not asking you to be brave for me," Jin-woo said. "I'm telling you what's true, and then I'm going to leave, and you're going to choose. And whatever you choose, I'll help you do it as safely as I can. Here's the truth in 3 pieces. 1. If you run, you'll run forever, and so will your sister, because Sunho doesn't forgive a loose end, and you'll always be one. 2. If you do nothing and hope, the diner falls, the block falls, and somewhere in the falling, he decides you know too much, and you and Talisa become a problem he solves quietly. Or 3. He paused. 3 is the dangerous one. 3 is we fight. Not with violence. I'm done with that. It's the whole reason I'm bleeding. We fight with what I've spent 24 years collecting. We get it into the hands of the one person investigating Sunho who can't be bought. And we do it in a way that makes you a witness too valuable to kill and too public to disappear. 3 might work. 3 might also get us both killed. I won't pretend otherwise." Devine had spent her whole life being handed other people's emergencies with no choice attached. Pay this, fix this, absorb this, be the glue. And here was a man handing her the largest emergency of her life, and doing the one thing no one had ever done. He was making it a choice. He was treating her like the author of her own life instead of its instrument. "Why me?" she said. "You could have grabbed your file and run yourself. Why drag me into it?" "Because you're already in it," he said simply. "You were in it the moment your grandmother's name landed in that folder, months before you ever met me. The only thing you get to decide now is whether you're in it as a victim or as a player. And because—" He stopped. The stones across the river. Because in 24 years, you are the first person who treated me like I was worth feeding when I had nothing to give back. I'd like, before this is over, to be the first person who treats you like you were never meant to be glue." She didn't cry. She'd cried over Marcus, over Talisa, over 100 small thefts of her own life. She did not cry over this. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt since she was a girl, the clean, cold thrill of deciding. "Tell me the terms," she said. "If we do this, you're three, I'm not your project, and I'm not your damsel. We're partners. You don't decide things for me to keep me safe. You don't lie to me to protect my feelings. Every risk you tell me, and I choose whether to take it. You said you keep records. Good. From now on, you keep them with me. Those are my terms." Jin-woo looked at her for a long moment. "Those are good terms," he said. "Better than any deal I've made in 20 years. He extended his hand across her grandmother's table, the same hand that had shaken from blood loss in the rain, steady now. "Partners, I'll teach you everything I know about how he moves." "You teach me." The almost smile, the crack in the still water. "You teach me whatever it is you know that let you walk into the rain toward a bleeding stranger. I think I need it more than the file." She took his hand. It was warm and dry and certain. "There's one more thing," she said. "Before we start. The investigator, the one who can't be bought. You know who it is?" "I do." "And the file's no good walking in cold. We need a reason for me to be the one who brings it. A clean reason. A story the world believes." She was thinking out loud now, the billing clerk's mind she'd been underestimating her whole life clicking into gear, seeing the structure under the chaos the way she saw it under 1,000 tangled medical claims. "I work in billing, medical billing. I spend all day finding the dollar that doesn't add up." She looked up at him, and there was something new in her face, something he'd put there by simply treating her like she was capable of it. "Jin-woo, how does Baek Sun-ho launder his money?" "Mostly through cash businesses he owns through shells," Jin-woo said slowly, watching her. "Restaurants, laundromats, and medical clinics." He went very still. 3 of them. Why?" Divine smiled, and it was not a kind smile, and it was the first genuinely free thing she'd done in 11 years. "Because I think one of his clinics bills through a clearinghouse that contracts with Meridian," she said. "And I think a billing clerk who finds fraud in a claim isn't a criminal turning evidence. She's a whistleblower with protections, and a paper trail nobody can say I stole, because finding the dollar that doesn't add up is literally my job." She stood, went to the drawer, and took out a yellow legal pad, the same kind she used to plan groceries around $412. "Okay, partner. Teach me how he moves, and then let me show you what I do." For the first time in 24 years, Park Jin-woo laughed, a short, startled, rusty sound, like a door that hadn't opened in a long time. And Divine realized she'd never wanted to hear a sound again as much as she wanted to hear that one. They worked until 3 in the morning, and somewhere in the falling apart of everything, the thing that should have been impossible started quietly to become a plan. The first move was small and legal and absolutely terrifying, and Divine made it at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, while Kessler's anxious cologne drifted over the cubicle wall. She pulled the claims. The clinic was called Restful Horizons Wellness, and on paper it was a sleepy little pain management practice on the east side, and it billed through a clearinghouse that, exactly as Divine had guessed at her grandmother's kitchen table, fed into the same system Meridian used for cross-network reconciliation. Divine had access to that reconciliation data. She'd had access for 9 years. Nobody had ever once thought to wonder what the quiet billing clerk could see, because nobody ever thinks about the glue. What she saw, when she finally looked, made her hands go still on the keyboard. Restful Horizons was billing for procedures it could not possibly be performing, hundreds of them. The same 11 CPT codes over and over on patients who, when Divine cross-referenced, carefully, on her own time, the way she'd cross-reference any anomaly, were either dead, non-existent, or had never set foot in the building. Phantom patients, phantom treatments, real money, federal money, Medicare and Medicaid dollars, flowing into restful horizons. And then Jin-woo showed her this part, the part she couldn't see from her desk, flowing out through 3 shell companies into the great dark river of Baek Sun-ho's empire, coming out clean on the other side as down payments on buildings like the ones on Lot Street. He's not just laundering money through the clinic, Divine breathed that first night, the two of them mapping it on her grandmother's table with the yellow legal pad now joined by 6 others. He's generating it. He's stealing from Medicare to buy the block. The diner, my grandmother's diner, he's planning to buy it with money he stole from dead people's medical claims. Yes, said Jin-woo. Something hardened in her then, something that had been soft and apologetic her whole life. Her grandmother had fed the neighborhood on credit nobody repaid, and this man was going to buy her grandmother's kitchen with money stolen in dead people's names. It wasn't fear that moved through Divine in that moment. It was something cleaner and far more useful. It was fury. The trouble was that filing a whistleblower complaint meant putting her name on it, and the moment her name went on a federal complaint about a Sun-ho clinic, the clock she'd been warned about started ticking for real. They set the boundary first. That was Jin-woo's word. Boundary. And Divine almost laughed at how small it sounded for a thing that might get her killed. But he was right. Before she filed anything, she had to make herself the kind of target that costs too much to hit. So she did 3 things in 1 week, and each one was a door closing behind her, and each one was the most frightening and the most freeing thing she had ever done. The first was to Lisa. Divine drove to Oakwood and sat her sister down and told her, not asked, told, that she was taking Lisa's phone off her account, that she could no longer co-sign or cover or rescue, that some things were happening in Divine's life that meant Lisa needed to be, for the first time, financially separate from her. Lisa's face went through the whole weather system, confusion, then hurt, then the old, reliable thunderhead. So that's it? After everything I'm dealing with, you're just cutting me off? Because some man… Tali, I'm protecting you. I need you to not be tied to me right now, by phone or money or anything, and I can't fully explain why, and you're going to have to trust that I love you enough to make you angry. Divine's voice didn't shake. She noticed it didn't shake. 11 years of shaking, and it picked now to stop. You called me the strong one my whole life like it was a job I owed you. Fine. This is me being strong. Get your own phone plan by Friday. She left her sister furious on the doorstep, and she cried in the car for exactly 4 minutes, and then she dried her face and drove to the next door. The second was Kessler. She walked into his office and quit. Gave 2 weeks, clean, professional, no explanation beyond an opportunity, because she could not file a federal fraud complaint about a clinic in Meridian's network while employed by Meridian without becoming useless to everyone and a liability to herself. The whistleblower statute she'd spent 2 nights reading protected an employee who reported wrongdoing. It protected a former employee who documented it cleanly even better, with no ongoing access to muddy the question of how she got it. Kessler blinked at her like a man watching a load-bearing wall walk out of his house. Divine, you're the glue. What am I supposed to… You're going to be fine, Mr. Kessler, she said gently. You're going to learn the system you never had to learn because I was here. It'll be hard for about a month, and then you'll be a person who understands his own billing. She smiled. That's a gift, honestly. I'm giving notice and a gift. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and drop a single word in the comments. Tell me the moment in your own life when you stopped being the glue. I want to read everyone. Now hit subscribe, because what Divine did next is the part where it stops being safe. The third thing she did was the file. Late on a Thursday night, in a small office above a print shop, Divine sat across a desk from a woman named Renata Okafor, a federal investigator with the kind of tired, immovable eyes that belonged to people who long ago stopped being able to be bought because they'd done the math on what their soul was worth and found it wasn't for sale. Jin-woo had been right that Okafor couldn't be bought. He'd been right that she'd been circling Sun-ho for 2 years and couldn't get inside. What Jin-woo could not do, walk in dirty, Divine did clean. She laid out the claims, the phantom patients, the 11 repeated codes, the dead people billed for treatment, cross-referenced against public death records she'd pulled entirely legally on her own time. She'd built it the way she built everything, meticulous, complete, every dollar traced to where it stopped making sense. She did not mention Jin-woo. That had been the hardest part of the plan, and the most important. His name appeared nowhere. His file existed nowhere in her submission. Because the moment a confessed enforcer's fingerprints touched the evidence died. Everything Divine brought, she could prove she'd found herself. Because she had. He'd only shown her where to point the skill she already owned. Renata Okafor looked through 40 pages without speaking. Then she set them down and looked at Divine over the top of her tired, immovable eyes and said the sentence that turned the whole thing real. "Miss Carraway, do you understand what you've brought me?" "A medical billing fraud," Divine said steadily. "Restful Horizons Wellness, federal funds. I found it doing my job, and I left that job specifically so I could bring it to you without conflict." "You've brought me," said Okafor slowly. "The first clean thread into the Baek Sun-ho organization that anyone has handed me in 2 years. I've been trying to get inside this man's money for so long I dream about shell companies." She tapped the pages. "And a billing clerk just walked in off the street and gave me the loose end of the whole sweater." Her eyes narrowed, not unkindly. "Which means you're either the luckiest person I've ever met, or you had help. And I think we both know there's no such thing as that kind of luck." The room was very quiet. This was the moment Jin-woo had warned her about. The knife edge. The place where the wrong word ended everything. "I had a job that let me see things other people couldn't," Divine said. "And I had a grandmother who taught me you don't look away from something just because looking is dangerous." She held the woman's gaze. "That's the help I had. Are you going to do something with this? Or did I quit my job for nothing?" Renata Okafor looked at her for a long, long moment. Then she pulled a legal pad of her own across the desk and uncapped a pen and said, "Tell me everything. Start with the 11 codes. We're going to be here a while." And somewhere across the city, in a black car, Jin-woo's phone buzzed with a single text from a number Divine had memorized and would erase before dawn. The thread is in her hands. It's started. There's no taking it back now. He read it twice. Then he looked out at the city he'd helped a monster build. And for the first time in 24 years, Park Jin-woo felt something he'd long ago decided was not for men like him. He felt hope, and it terrified him more than any knife ever had. It took 4 months for the thread to pull the sweater apart, and that was where Baek Sun-ho made his mistake. He came for Divine before the indictment, not after. That was the night the story began. The back room of the Hanwoo Grill, the gun on the table, the soup steaming, the photograph of Talisa with a red circle around her head. Sun-ho was a careful man, and careful men, when they sense a thread being pulled, go looking for the hand that holds it. His people had finally connected the whistleblower complaint to the quiet billing clerk who'd quit Meridian. They'd connected the billing clerk to a bleeding man in the rain on Lot Street 4 months back. And Baek Sun-ho, who had not stayed alive for 30 years by being slow, had pulled both Jin-woo and Divine into that back room to do the math out loud. You already know what Divine did in that room. She stood up. She put her body between the photograph and the door. She told a man who owned half the city that she would burn his buildings to the ground starting with that one, and nobody laughed. What you don't know is what happened next. What happened next is that Divine, with her heart slamming and her hands somehow steady, said the second thing, the thing she and Jin-woo and Renata Okafor had built over 4 months precisely for this moment, because they had always known he might come for her before the law could close. "You should know," Divine said, "that I'm not the thread. I'm the knot. If anything happens to me or my sister or him." She didn't look at Jin-woo. She'd learned that lesson. "There's a federal investigator who already has everything. The clinic, the codes, the shells, the block. She has a letter from me that gets opened the day I miss a single check-in. You don't get to make me disappear, Mr. Sun-ho. You spent 30 years making sure nobody could touch your money. I'm the one mistake you didn't plan for. A person who saw it for free, with nothing to gain, who you can't buy because I already gave away the only thing you understand. You're holding a gun on the wrong woman. The dangerous one already mailed the letter. For a long moment, the only sound was the soup, ticking faintly as it cooled. Then Baek Sun-ho did the thing that, in the end, destroyed him. He didn't believe her. Men like him never believe that a person can't be bought, because if that were true, then their whole life had been built on a misunderstanding of human beings, and that is a thing such a man cannot afford to know. So he decided she was bluffing, and he made the call to have the clinic's records cleaned that very night, a call that Renata Okafor's wiretap, freshly and legally authorized off the strength of Divine's clean complaint, recorded in full. He ordered the destruction of federal evidence on a monitored line. He handed them obstruction on top of fraud. He did it because a woman who fed strangers in the rain had made him angry enough to be stupid, and that, Jin-woo would tell her later, the closest he ever came to weeping, that was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 24 years of watching that man win. The indictment came down 6 weeks later. It was on the news, the real news, the front of it. Baek Sun-ho, longtime fixture of the city's underworld, charged in sweeping federal case spanning healthcare fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Restful horizons. Wellness, padlocked. The shell companies, frozen. The block on Lot Street, the buildings he'd spent years squeezing out of their owners, tangled up in federal forfeiture, every acquisition halted. Divine sat in the gallery for the arraignment. She'd earned the right. She was a protected witness now, exactly as Jin-woo had designed, too public and too documented to touch. She wore her grandmother's good coat. And when they brought Baek Sun-ho in, smaller in the fluorescent light than he'd seemed across the lacquered table, he found her in the gallery with his still, cold eyes, and Divine did not look away. She'd spent her whole life looking away, looking down, making herself small so larger people could feel large, and she sat in that gallery in her dead grandmother's coat and held the gaze of the most dangerous man she'd ever met, and she let him see, clearly, completely, that she was not afraid of him, and never would be again. He looked away first. That was the public victory, not the indictment, though the indictment was real and would put him away for the rest of his natural life. The victory was a billing clerk in a borrowed coat outlasting a crime boss in a staring contest, and the boss blinking first, in front of God and the federal court, and a row of reporters who had no idea they were watching the most important thing in the room. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, Renata Okafor found her. The tired, immovable eyes were, for once, not tired. "In 30 years," Okafor said, "I have never closed a case I cared about more or expected less. You know that, right? You walked in off the street and handed me a man I'd given up on." She studied Divine. "You did have help. I still think that. And I've decided I don't need to know, because everything you brought me was clean, and the only fingerprints on this case are yours and his and mine." She put out her hand. "Whatever you did, Ms. Carraway, however you really pulled this thread loose, you should know you did something most people with badges and budgets couldn't. You should be proud of yourself in a way I suspect you've never let yourself be." Divine shook her hand, and on the courthouse steps, in the cold, clean light, she did something she could not remember ever doing before in her entire life. She let herself be proud. Talisa came back 3 weeks after the indictment, and she came back the way she'd always come back, in crisis, in need, certain her sister was a resource that had simply, temporarily gone offline. She'd seen the news? Of course she'd seen the news. The whole city had, and somewhere in it was her own sister's name, protected witness, and Talisa had done the thing Talisa always did, which was to locate, with unerring instinct, the angle that pointed back toward her own needs. "So you're some kind of hero now," Talisa said in Divine's kitchen, uninvited, the old thunderhead already building. "You took down a crime boss, and you couldn't keep paying my phone? You cut me off and disappeared and let me think you were dying of something, and the whole time you were, what, playing detective with some Korean gangster?" Her voice cracked, and underneath the anger was the real thing, the hurt. And Divine heard it and felt it and did not, this time, rush to absorb it. "You don't get to just change, Divine. You don't get to decide one day that you're done being my sister." I'm not done being your sister, Divine said quietly. I'm done being your bank. Those aren't the same thing. You only ever knew me as one of them. That's not your fault. I taught you that. Grandma taught me and I taught you. And somewhere a long way back somebody taught Grandma. We've been handing it down like it was love. She pulled out a chair. Sit down, Tali. I want to tell you something, and I want you to actually hear it. And Divine told her sister the truth. Not about the case, the parts she couldn't say, but the true thing underneath all of it. That she had spent 34 years believing she was only worth what she gave away. That she'd co-signed and covered and rescued not out of strength, but out of fear. The bone-deep terror that the day she stopped being useful, every person she loved would close the account and leave. That Talisa had been right in a terrible way all those years. Divine was the strong one. But not the way Talisa meant. Not strong like a thing you lean on until it cracks. Strong like a thing that finally learns to stand up straight and stop apologizing for taking up space. I love you, Divine said. I will always love you. I will be at your wedding and your kids' birthdays, and I will show up at 3 a.m. if you're in real danger. But I am not going to fund your life anymore, and I am not going to absorb your storms anymore. And the reason isn't that I love you less. It's that I finally love me enough to stop. And here's the part that's going to make you angry, and I need you to hear it anyway. She held her sister's eyes the way she'd held Sunho's, but soft now, full of grief and love. I think you can stand up too, Tali. I think you've leaned on me so long you forgot you have legs, and I'm not taking my shoulder away to punish you. I'm taking it away because I believe you can walk. Nobody ever believed that about you out loud before, including you. So, there it is. I believe it. Talisa cried. The thunderhead broke into real rain, the kind that's grief and not manipulation. And for a moment, Divine ached to do the old thing, to gather her up and fix it and make herself the solution. She didn't. She sat with her sister in the storm and let the storm be Talisa's to weather. And that, not the indictment, not the courthouse, was the hardest boundary she ever held. I don't know how to be a person who doesn't call you, Talisa whispered. I know, Divine said. Neither do I. We'll both be bad at this for a while, but you'll be a whole person on the other side of it, and so will I. And we'll like each other better, I think, when neither one of us is a wall the other one leans on. Talisa left that night without asking for money. It was the first time in 11 years. At the door she turned, mascara wrecked, and said the thing that told Divine the boundary had landed where it needed to. That man, the one you can't talk about, does he... She searched for it. Does he see you? Like, actually see you? Divine thought about a man in the rain asking who taught you that you have to earn the right to be fed. Yeah, she said. He's the first one who ever did. Good, said Talisa, and she meant it. And that one word, freely given, with nothing attached, was worth more than every dollar Divine had ever handed her. Then don't you dare turn yourself into glue for him either. I won't, Divine said. And for the first time, she knew it was true, because the man in question had never once asked her to. Here's the thing nobody tells you about getting your life back. It doesn't arrive in a courtroom. It arrives on an ordinary afternoon, in an envelope when you least expect it. The whistleblower statute Divine had read on 2 sleepless nights at her grandmother's table had a provision in it, the kind of provision that exists precisely so that people will do the dangerous, civic, terrifying thing she'd done. When a private citizen's complaint recovers stolen federal funds, that citizen is entitled to a share of the recovery. Divine had not done it for that. She'd genuinely forgotten the provision existed until Renata Okafor mentioned it on the courthouse steps. She'd brought the file because a man was going to buy her grandmother's kitchen with money stolen from dead people, and that was not a thing she could live next to. But the funds recovered from the Beck Sunho organization ran into the tens of millions. And Divine's share, when the envelope finally came, 11 months after a man bled in the rain behind a dead diner, was an amount of money she had to read 4 times, because the commas didn't make sense to a woman who'd organized her entire existence around $412. She did not buy a car. She did not move. The first thing Divine Caraway did with the first real money of her life was drive to City Hall and pay off the tax lien on her grandmother's diner. $18,400, the exact number Jin-woo had recited to her in the rain on the night this all began. The number that had hung over her like weather for 2 years. She paid it in full. She got the deed clear. And then she stood on Lot Street in front of the buzzing dead neon that spelled Eddie's in her grandmother's cursive, and she let herself cry, and this time the crying didn't feel like losing. It felt like setting something down she'd carried so long she'd stopped feeling the weight. She reopened it 4 months later. Not as it was. She didn't have the years or the wish to run a full diner. She opened it as something her grandmother would have understood instantly. A community kitchen that served real meals at real tables for whatever people could pay, and free to anyone who couldn't, with the gap covered by the rest of the recovery, structured carefully, sustainably, by a woman who had spent 9 years learning exactly how money moves and stops and hides. She named it Eddie's still. She kept the neon. She fixed the buzz. On opening day, the line went around the block. Some of the people in it were the ones she'd fed under the rail bridge for years, 3 nights a week, in secret, ashamed almost. And now, here she was feeding them at tablecloths in the light, with her own name on the deed and her grandmother's name on the door, and not one cell of it borrowed or begged or apologized for. She'd built it. Her skill, her risk, her clean hands, her refusal to look away. Hers. Renata Okafor came. She ordered the oxtail. She ate 2 bowls and didn't say much, and at the end she gripped Divine's hand across the counter and said, "Your grandmother would be insufferable about this, you know." And Divine laughed so hard she had to sit down. Kessler came too, of all people, looking lost without his cubicle and proud in a way that surprised them both. "I learned the billing," he announced, like a man reporting from the front. "It was awful, but I learned it. I think about you every day at 4 o'clock when the reconciliations run. You really were the glue, Divine." Then he paused and corrected himself, and it was the kindest thing he'd ever said to her. "No, you weren't the glue. We just never noticed you were the architect. Glue doesn't see the whole building. You always saw the whole building." That landed somewhere deep. Architect. Jin-woo had wanted to be one, before the debt took him at 16. And here was Divine, who'd never had a title grander than coordinator, being called one over a bowl of her grandmother's stew, and understanding for the first time that she had always been one. She'd just spent her whole life drawing other people's blueprints for free. That night, after the last table cleared, Divine stood alone in the warm, bright kitchen that was wholly, legally, unmistakably hers, and she did the math one more time. Not $412, not a buffer against disaster. A foundation, a thing that grew. A thing she'd built with the one resource no one had ever been able to take from her or talk her out of, the stubborn refusal to look away from what was wrong. She'd gotten herself back, and it turned out the self she got back was someone she'd never actually met, someone strong not from absorbing, but from choosing, someone whose kindness was no longer a fee she paid to be allowed to exist, but a gift she gave because she finally had a surplus. For the first time in her life, Divine Caraway had more than she needed, and the having didn't make her smaller. It made her exactly her own size. Jin-woo did not testify. He couldn't. His name had to stay out of it. That was the architecture of the whole thing. And so the man who'd made it all possible stood in none of the photographs and took none of the credit, and watched from the edges as the woman he'd warned to run instead changed the city. It cost him. People in his old world assumed he'd informed. The truth, that a billing clerk had done it cleanly without him, was somehow harder for them to believe than betrayal. He had to leave the only life he'd known, dirty as it was. The organization that had owned him since he was 16 was rubble, and a man who has been a weapon for 24 years does not simply become a person because the war is over. He had no skills the daylight world recognized. He had a server full of records that had ended a kingdom, and no idea who he was without it. He came to the kitchen on a Tuesday, weeks after opening, when the line had thinned and the light was low. He sat at the counter the way he'd once sat on the loading step in the rain, and Divine set a bowl of oxtail in front of him without a word, the way she had that first night, and they were quiet together for a while. "I don't know how to do this," he finally said. The stones across the river, but slower now, more honest. "Any of it. I've been afraid for so long that I built a life out of being the thing other people were afraid of. It was the only way I knew not to be the boy bleeding in the rain." He looked at the bowl. "I gave you a file. You gave me, I don't have the word. You gave me back something I sold at 16 and stopped looking for. And now I don't know what I'm allowed to want, because everything I've ever wanted I had to take, and I'm done taking. So I'm sitting in your kitchen with no idea how to ask for the one thing I want, which is to be allowed to stay near it. Near you. The version of me that exists in this room is the only one I've ever liked." It was the most words she'd ever heard him say at once, and Divine, who had spent her whole life being asked for things, drained by the asking, leashed by it, heard for the first time a man ask for something in a way that left her more, not less. "Here's what I've learned," she said. "From you, mostly, though you don't know it. When you came to my door and told me to run, you didn't try to be my hero. You gave me the truth and let me choose. Nobody had ever done that, and it taught me the difference between someone who needs you and someone who sees you, because the person who sees you wants you to be free, even when it would be easier for them if you weren't." She put her hand over his on the counter. "I'm not going to be your project, Jin-woo, and you're not going to be mine. I don't need rescuing, and neither do you. But I would like..." She found her own stones now, set them carefully. "I would like to build something next to you, not leaning, beside. Two people who already know they can stand alone, choosing every day to stand together anyway. That's the only kind of love I'm interested in now. The kind you choose from a position of strength instead of grab from a place of fear." "I don't know how to be loved from a position of strength," Jin-woo said. "I've only ever been useful or feared." "Neither did I," said Divine. 3 months ago, I thought love was a bill you paid forever to keep people from leaving. We're both going to be bad at this for a while." She almost smiled. "I keep telling people that lately. Turns out the whole back half of life is just being bad at good things until you're not." He turned his hand over, under hers, so their palms met. The man the city had feared. The woman who'd been its glue. Two people who'd each spent decades being the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, sitting in a bright, warm kitchen that one of them owned, and the other had helped make possible, choosing. "I want to learn the kitchen," Jin-woo said suddenly. Not to be useful so you'll keep me. I want to learn it. I was supposed to be an architect. I never got to build anything that wasn't a way to hurt someone or hide money. I'd like to build something that feeds people. With you. As a partner. Equal. I'll be terrible at first." "You'll be terrible at first," Divine agreed, and now she was smiling, fully, the free smile, the one that had taken 34 years to arrive. "Grandma's oxtail takes 6 hours and you have no patience and you're going to hate it." "I have 24 years of patience," said Park Jin-woo. "I was just spending it on the wrong things." And he stayed, not because she rescued him and not because he rescued her, but because two people who'd each finally learned to stand had looked at each other and decided that standing together was better. A choice, renewed daily, between equals, with nothing owed and nothing leveraged and nothing absorbed. He was, in fact, terrible at the oxtail for months. He got better. He turned out to have, buried under 24 years of being a weapon, a real gift for the front of the house, for reading a room, for knowing who needed a quiet table and who needed to be left alone. The same skill that had once made him dangerous, now spent on making strangers feel seen. The man who'd found things out for a monster spent his days finding out which regular's wife had passed, which kid hadn't eaten, who to slip an extra bowl to without a word. He found his patience. He built something that fed people. He became, at 41, in a kitchen on Lot Street, something close to the boy he'd been sold away from at 16. So here's where we leave them. A community kitchen on Lot Street with the neon fixed and the buzz finally gone. A woman behind the counter who once organized her whole life around $412 and a fear of being unneeded, now standing at exactly her own size. A man beside her who was once the most dangerous thing in the city, learning, slowly, terribly, beautifully, how to build instead of take. This was never really a story about a stranger turning out to be a Korean boss who owned half the city. That was just the night her life changed, and the night your life changes almost never announces itself. It gets in line behind 100 ordinary nights and waits its turn. It was a story about the difference between being kind because you're afraid and being kind because you're free. Divine spent 34 years being good as a way of begging not to be abandoned, feeding everyone, absorbing everything, certain that the day she stopped being useful was the day the love ran out. And it took a bleeding stranger in the rain, of all people, to show her the truth, that the kindness given from fear is a leash, and the kindness given from freedom is a gift, and they look identical from the outside and are nothing alike on the inside. She didn't stop being kind. She just stopped paying for the right to exist. And the moment she did, she discovered she'd been an architect her whole life, mistaken by everyone, including herself, for glue. If you've ever been the glue, the one who holds it all together and gets none of the credit and dries up alone in a drawer, I want you to hear the thing Divine learned, the thing that cost her everything and gave her back herself. You were never the glue. You were always the architect. You just kept drawing other people's blueprints for free. Drop a comment and tell me, I read every single one. When did you first realize you'd been giving from fear instead of freedom? And if this story moved you, share it with the person in your life who needs to hear that they're allowed to stop. Subscribe, because next week there's another woman, another night her life changed, another ordinary person who turned out to be extraordinary the whole time. Divine Caraway gave a stranger food in the rain, and it cost her everything she thought she was. She didn't get a fairy tale ending. She got something better. She got herself back.